What I'm doing today is taking an old quilt. This was a quilt I made when I was about 18. So it's a very old quilt. And I had been repairing it. It's a simple bandana quilt. And I had been repairing it. And what I have decided to do is to cut it down. These were hand-quilted squares I had done, like I said, when I was 18. I took the center out of each bandana. They're about 8.5 inches square. And I'm making this into a tablecloth. The whole idea behind the quilt, making the quilt at that time, is something I want to preserve. I want to hang on to the quilt, but the quilt itself is not doing so well. So I'm remaking it into a tablecloth. Now, on some of the squares, they were so faded or starting to rip that I took a piece of fabric and put on top of them. And this is something you can do. I mean, I can use this for things other than a tablecloth. I can use it for a whole bunch of things. But my point in this video is actually about the machine. This is my 1891 white VS2B. White Sewing Machine Company was a competitor of Singer's. The VS2B, you do turn the hand wheel forward. On the later models, except for the other family rotary I have, which is a very early family rotary. Normally on a white, you turn the hand wheel backwards. But the whole point, this next week we're having a heat wave, they're predicting. In New England, I guess they're saying 95 to 100 and something for several days next week. And there's a lot of climate change people on social media because Florida just flooded and all kinds of things going on. These old machines that some people I know see as inconvenient because, I don't know, they don't have a lot of bells and whistles. These are wonderful for fighting climate change. And having one of these, they're not going to break, basically. They're cast iron, very simple to thread and use. The main problem is usually making sure you have the bobbin case of whatever type you need and the bobbins. But if you have, on these old whites, very often these old bobbin winders freeze up. But with evaporust and a little bit of work, you can generally get them working again if you find one of those. This is the way to sew if you want to be green, is with an old made in America cast iron sewing machine. I happen to like the treadle for the exercise with my legs. You can also have a Singer, I have a few Singers, as a hand crank. And use it as a table machine. If you save on electricity, you are helping the planet. And they sew beautifully. They sew absolutely beautifully. This is when sewing was simple. And it just did the sewing. You didn't need a computerized machine to make Mickey Mouse, because what you were doing was sewing linens, clothes, housewares, those types of things, which are what keep us warm, shaded, cool, clean, the basics. So now, for example, next week it's going to be, I think on the Cape here, it's only going to go up to like the mid-80s because we stick out on the ocean. But my house is enclosed. It's well insulated. It gets hot in here. At night, I cover the windows. I block the light from coming in, keeps the house cooler. You can use old fabric, scraps, anything to make better shades, thicker shades, insulated shades that will then not let the heat into the house, because that leads to using the air conditioning. Somebody gave me a really nice 14,000 BTU air conditioner that I only have to run for like 15 minutes and it cools the whole house. But that amount of energy is a lot. So if I can find simpler ways to keep the house cool or clean or warm, it just makes more sense. A continuing, simple way of life before people could afford 14,000 BTU air conditioners. It all starts with simple sewing. I want to add here, simple sewing extends, of course, or begins with hand sewing, and a computerized sewing machine that can make Mickey Mouse. You know, this is how people did that before computerized sewing machines. They did it by hand. This is cross-stitch fabric. This is the start of an alphabet sampler. It's more time-consuming, but to me, so if you have a computerized sewing machine, I don't know if you could actually do it like a sampler, because I don't have one. But if you wanted to do a little graphic, sure, you can program your machine and stick the fabric in the hoop under there, and it's not the same. It's not the same. This is doing it all by hand. So most cross-stitch and embroidery is small because it's wonderful. It's not mechanized, but each one of these is hand-stitched. And then when you run your hand over this, you know somebody cared enough to make a design. So again, I think a friend of mine had a computerized sewing machine, and I think it cost her like $1,500. You know, this white was, well, my dad had the treadle. I think I paid $30 for the head, and then I had to clean it up a little bit, but not very much. I had to buy bobbins. They were expensive, but it came with the shuttle. I did find an extra shuttle, nowhere near $1,500. Maybe $100 at the most. And then floss and needles are so cheap. In other words, if we're going to be concerned about global warming and about not overusing electricity, then these are our tools. An old treadle machine, you can still find them on eBay, in yard sales, in old barns, an old hand crank machine, and actually hand sewing, which I'm a big advocate of anyway. It makes such a difference to the person receiving it. I made a quilt for my father about 15 years ago, and I hand quilted the whole thing. And it's different from machine quilting everything. And it is more personal, but it's also more of a skill. So then you're making the stitches and not the machine. Another aspect of simple sewing, and yes, I have a cross-stitch Mickey Mouse.